you everyone for coming here today. I'd like to invite our fantastic panel up before I introduce this very important topic. So, if I can invite Mike O'Neill, Managing Director, Optimal Risk, up to the stage, Dr. Christopher Williams-Martin, CEO for Fly Elite Jets, and Matt McGinn from Global Protect Security. I'd love to have you here at the front. We have a couple of roaming mics. Fantastic. Well, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for coming to this event, and thank you for having us. My name is Phelim, Rowe, and I am delighted to talk to you about when things go wrong, backup, disaster recovery, austere environments, and what we have decided to do with our panel is to frame it in roughly 3 different genres of quote-unquote when things go wrong. And so, beyond the traditional what if we don't have comms and can't you read a map, we thought, what if we tackle it through 3 different prisms? Comms, connectivity, mobility, and opportunism. Because, of course, adversaries can take advantage of things when they go wrong. And that's why we have a spectrum of panelists on our stage today. I tell you what, let's go down the line to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and where on that spectrum they sit. Let's start with you, Matt.
Thank you, Phelim. I don't know if you can hear me, sorry. I'm not sure this is working. I don't operate in the tech spectrum. So my name's Matt McGinn. I am the Managing Director of Global Protect. We are a specialist counterintelligence, counter-espionage, counter-sabotage company. My background is in technical eavesdropping and technical surveillance countermeasures, although the portfolio that we deal with now as a company and our clients is across a much broader spectrum in the specialist protective space. Nice to be here.
Fantastic. Dr. Christopher?
Is it on? Yeah. So I'm Chris. I'm the CEO of Fly Elite Jets. We're a private jet and helicopter company. And we're very much at the reactive end. I try and be proactive, but we're at the reactive end of certainly current events. And I got back this morning from Lebanon.
Fantastic. And Mike?
Morning everyone. Mike O'Neill, I'm the MD of Optimal Risk Group. We provide risk and security management for our clients based from the UK, but we've got operations going on all around the world. Okay,
and I'm sure we'll draw out case studies and recent examples, especially of those geographies we've been talking about. We heard in the supply chain session before, Anna was mentioning Ukraine and Lebanon and all things Middle East. So I guess, Mike, let's start with you. Is the problem we're trying to solve in a panel such as this that protectors, quote unquote, don't train in austere or degraded environments? Is that what we're ultimately saying? We need to improve that because we don't train in those environments.
We as a business talk to our clients about resilience, business continuity planning, but how many of you putting on CP or EP operations actually run through the training beforehand? Do you prepare for that? Do you talk about the downside, how things could go wrong? I just got back from Jordan on Sunday, and earlier in the week during the build-up and just after the Iranian missile attack, GPS showed wherever you were at Queen Alia International Airport in Amman. Every so often I was getting alerts from my Apple AirTags that my bag was last seen at Queen Alia International Airport. And, yeah, the Israelis were obviously spoofing that. But if you didn't know the country, you didn't have drivers that knew their way around, there could have been some real problems with that. And that's quite an easy technology for certainly nation states to throw into the mix. We talk about mobile phones as a backup, but we mentioned sat phones earlier. It's so easy for people to get quite lazy. And I don't mean they're not doing their job well, but they're not thinking about what could go wrong. I think it's something we need to inject. Even if it's just a tabletop exercise, what would we do? Hands up here, certainly the Brits. Who's got an A to Z in their car? 3, 4, okay. Who relies on GPS? Don't we all? So, I mean, just to try and give a measure of that. So if your GPS started showing you that you were at Heathrow Airport every time you looked at it, you're going to have problems. And I think it's that reliance that we unselfconsciously drifted into that we need to be prepared to challenge.
I like that. Well then, Dr. Christopher, let's progress that and look at the subject of mobility, because I suppose to use elite private jets or any private mobility in that way, is that acknowledging that sometimes it's not possible to fly in a proprietary way?
Yeah. So I used to be the mindset that if you're in country somewhere and it all goes wrong, don't worry because your government will get you out. And that's not the case, or at least not immediately anyway. So we tend to, I mean, we've done evacs from Libya, Ukraine, Sudan, Iraq, Afghanistan, and we'll keep doing it until Lloyd's of London say you ain't flying anymore. So we'll push it until we can. You can't rely on scheduled services, and all the major carriers stopped flying to Lebanon and Tel Aviv some time back. There's an airline called MEA, Middle Eastern Airlines. They're flying pretty regularly, although they've had several incidents in the last week which could have downed an aircraft. Air France had an RPG fired at their aircraft the other day, and we had an aircraft on the ground in Amman, which is basically safe, and the crew was standing on the jet and 3 missiles flew straight over the top. And it's like, wow. So you can't rely on your government, you can't rely on scheduled services, and we're the kind of panic call to say, help, can you get me out of here? I just want to say one thing. So there's quite a few decent companies in my sector, but there's also, like any sector, there's some sharks, and I witnessed some horrible things when I was in country where the whole system's broken. There's lots of people on the ground at the airport that are corrupt, and they're taking bribes to let people through that shouldn't be let through. There's things being passed around the security gates that shouldn't be allowed airside, and people are being put onto aircraft that have no chance whatsoever in being allowed into a country. So it's just like another flight, and we're not doing that, and we're doing flights at net, or very, very close to net. So yeah, in answer to your question, when it all goes wrong, you've either got to get out on your own, by whatever means, or call a company like us and hope that we've got war risk insurance to get you out legally and safely.
Could I just add to that quickly? I had a message a couple of days ago from somebody who said they were operating boats out of Lebanon over to Cyprus. And I went back and said, is that from Tripoli? And he went, no, it's Lebanon, not Libya. Well, Tripoli is a town in the north of Lebanon. So this guy was offering boat rides on the back of a few WhatsApp messages he's received. So, you really have to do your due diligence.
It sounds like opportunism, and apropos opportunism, Matt, what kind of things should people expect people will take advantage of in a comms blackout or a power blackout? Because your world is TSCM. Think about the other foot. What should we think about?
I think it's a really good point. I think to myth bust slightly, my experience out of kind of HMG for the last 18 months has been that within our industry, and I mean the security industry writ large, not just the kind of the CPO element, there is a real arrogance around our adversaries and the people we're trying to protect assets and people from, which are, in the defensive space we're really clever, and our adversaries, they can't think through the different things we can protect, and they won't seek to take advantage, when in actual fact, from an offensive perspective of old, before we ever did anything, we would spend a huge amount of time doing intelligence analysis and research, and we'd have backup plan after backup plan to take advantage of placebo security or a lack of training in a certain space. And for the people I know in the room, I have a reputation for kind of being a bit of a straight shooter and calling out a few things. Within our industry, for example, there are TSCM courses specifically for people like you in the room for £400 that last a day. It was really fascinating because it's taken me 25 years to get to a stage where I could walk into a room, and I know Mike will have similar experience, where I can walk into a room and say to a client, or my teams can, yeah, we've got we are pretty confident that your space is clear. And that lack of training or understanding, through no fault of people that attend those courses, provides an opportunity for adversaries to take advantage, which is absolutely huge, and a really good example in a congested space. If you're protecting a principal and you find yourself out of phone signal, and it's a bit of a crude example, you're on a road move somewhere, and you think that the point at which there's no phone signal in the vehicle or in the convoy means you're now safe. There's no problems whatsoever. You can talk openly and freely about very sensitive things. But in actual fact, from an adversarial perspective, we will have identified that you're going to travel in a place where there's no phone signal, and we'll have put devices that just store and retrieve in the car or on the person that don't require any kind of spectrum connectivity, which is really crude and dumb, but unbelievably easy done, operating in that space of kind of ambiguity around training, I think. So I think the lesson is you're never safe. There's always opportunity.
And that's an important picture, isn't it? And it brings it to life, because some of those quote unquote dumb attacks have been one of them, some of those noteworthy. But Mike, let's go back to you. We're talking about when things go wrong, when things go down. Do we too readily conflate power going down with connectivity going down? Should we think differently about a lack of power and a lack of connectivity? We just had an example about where things have their own power sources. Quite often we think, oh no, I can't communicate, I can't read a map. Is there something we should do differently when we think about power and connectivity?
I think if we're talking about telecoms, then they're independently powered networks generally, so that may well still work. So you may have a power blackout in the building or the grid square or town that you're in, and may still have communications as long as you can keep powering up your communication device. So backups, that's fairly straightforward. I think it's where it becomes a much broader, regional or countrywide disaster, then I think that's where problems will certainly occur. I mean, any EP teams that have still got people in Florida or certain areas of Florida will have had to make a fairly disastrous risk assessment, I would think. But these things can come on really quickly. And I think it's the natural disasters that we also need to give some thought to and understand it, because you can be in parts of the world where an earthquake can strike without warning. And it's not only your voice communications, data communications, it's actually being able to move. The roads will be blocked, all of those things. So how long can you actually survive as an independent unit? Do you have your own food supplies on board, whether it's dry, that never tastes that good but will keep you going? So it's about understanding the context of the situation that you're going to be operating in, and just the what if and the so what questions. And if that happens, and hopefully next year you'll look at the use by dates on the food packets that you've got on the back of the car and happily throw them away because you've never had to use them. But it's trying to think outside the box, what could happen, not necessarily what is likely to happen, just having a broader mindset.
I think that's a great point. So let's connect that to mobility. And Dr. Christopher, I know that you're not freight per se, but has there been call to bring in power, bring in generators? Because yes, you could jam sat phones or GPS or hedgehog, anything you like, but surely one of the elements is a backup power source that you could bring into country.
I'm afraid it's a disappointing answer because we don't tend to do cargo. We specialise in our field, which is private and private jets, helicopters and commercial airlines. We do get calls for it and we tend to refer to a partner. We stick with what we're good at and that way it can't go wrong really. But just adding on the PowerPoint if I may. When you're in an aircraft, you have a certain amount of power. You have the ability to use the sat phones on board, which are secure. You have an APU, auxiliary power unit, which powers all the systems, etc. But that's not forever. You've got a certain amount of life there. So you're self-sustained to a point, but we are dependent on airport systems. So, for example, coming back from Lebanon this morning, if the power systems there have gone down, that's your ATC gone, which means you can't take off safely. You can't operate in and out safely. The lights that you depend on for early morning and late night departures, if they go down, you can't operate safely. But then again, in a survival situation where you might die, you have to sort of push the envelope.
Well, that's a great success, and again, it's great to have people who have just come back from things that we've been talking about all day. Matt, same question for you. I don't know where the power connectivity divide would be in the world of TSCM, but I'll give it to you and see where you roll with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just adding to Mike's point, I am in no way trained to do anything in close protection. I know absolutely nothing. Many years ago, I went out with the Royal Military Police in Bosnia with a brigade commander to see if it was something that I could get into. It was that's as much experience I've got, but I do have a lot of experience of deploying capability, deploying to high threat environments where communication is always a problem. And just to add to Mike's point about a good way to approach it, and you'll all have heard of this, the model of PACE, so primary, alternate, contingent and emergency communications. Having something in your back pocket is obviously really vital, and there's no suggestion, certainly in my experience, that your contingent or emergency communications need to be an actual physical method of communicating. They can just be reporting lines as you transit through a territory and missing them or not through various means. But to answer the question that Phelim has asked, power in my space, in eavesdropping, in counter eavesdropping, power is massive. You need power to be able to operate the equipment. Batteries don't last very long, but in the eavesdropping space, there will be eavesdropping attacks all over, outside using street furniture, where you unscrew the top of a bollard. It's got a high-resolution camera in it, and underneath it's got 30 lithium-ion batteries connected in series that will last forever. I know that because Chatham House rules slightly. The National Crime Agency, it's a favourite technique using street furniture to be able to track people messing about on rail lines and power lines and doing nefarious stuff. So in the eavesdropping space, again, going back to the points I made right at the start, never assume that because there's no power, you're safe, because Mark 1 ear is a really good eavesdropping device, right way through to devices that ordinarily, if they're quick plant devices, have been brought in a chair and replaced with something that'll have its own organic power anyway. From an eavesdropping perspective, you're really only looking at things that have taken a period of time, a significant period of time, to install into the fabric of buildings that have connection to requisite power. But in any case, as we see more and more nowadays, if that were to happen, they'd probably be connected to a backup power source anyway. Certainly if they weren't anticipating any kind of TSCM capability to come and search for it. So power isn't a massive consideration for technical eavesdropping.
Okay, I like that. Back to Mike.
Just one quick point. Going back to my military days, when we used to use maps, but you would have alternate RVs, emergency RVs, and even a war RV that would have certain parameters around it. Might sound a bit dramatic, but it is something that you can consider in a challenging environment where comms may be patchy or could fall out. Just say, right, if we don't hear from you, everyone, we'll look at noon tomorrow at this location. Things like that can just give you something to go on if all comms and all other support means go down.
So building on that, and I won't use the corona word, but let's say 4 years ago, many colleagues in the room discovered, because they couldn't go anywhere, they had another string to their bow, which was protective intelligence or threat intel. They could do it from the comfort of their desk, but it created a hunger for ground truth. Now maybe that became a bit populist, and as we said today, and Chuck said today, everyone is a little bit political, you can't escape it. But do you think that when things go wrong, when things go down, the search for ground truth becomes ever more important? And does it expose that in fact we should be looking for ground truth whether or not we've got an austere environment?
I mean, ground truth is it. Whatever intelligence level you get, whatever somebody comes out with, that will not be as granular as someone that's actually in the town that you're interested in. So that level of ground truth can be really, really useful. our Foreign Office will put out descriptors about where you shouldn't go. They, by definition, have to cover quite a large area. They might talk about a border region or a region of a particular country, but it can be much more granular within that. So if that ground truth is available, but what is ground truth, then that's another question.
Yeah, because it could be your perspective, and you know, it's that true, false, don't know, and that don't know category. It's just a wildly subjective category. What do you think, Dr. Crispo?
Yeah, I completely agree. So within flight, you have to have planning, and literally there is the term flight plan, which is everything in and around that flight, before, during, and after. So we go to sub-Saharan Africa quite a lot, and so I mean, I'll go as far as says 9 times out of 10, what we're told isn't the case at all. So the ground truth is actually really important. So we'll speak to locals that we know and trust to say, okay, this handler's telling us they've got this. Is that actually the case? Can you go and check it out? And quite often there's an exaggeration of, oh yeah, we've got 16,000 gallons of A1. You think, really? That's quite a lot, yeah, I mean it's a minefield down there. So we like to get as accurate intel so that when we're doing a long leg and we're going down there, we know we're going to need a massive uplift of fuel and we'll need catering and maybe whatever else supplies, we can actually get it and it's actually there in place. So we work on the basis that you can't really trust anyone until you've actually got someone there who's actually physically seeing it.
Yeah, that plays into the cyber security zero trust or trust but verify, which I think EP's been doing forever anyway. But what about the world of TSCM? Is it frequently happening that you get threat intel providers saying this is the case, and your ground truth through TSCM means, or the other way around, reveals it's not actually the case?
From my perspective, I don't know. I'll use the analogy of a paramedic. When you're with my background of technical attack, we would do the install. We would come up with a means of getting information. But much like a paramedic never finds out what happened to the person that was in their ambulance, we're never around. We were never around to actually see what the process data was overly, or certainly understand the context of it. What I would like to do is flip it slightly. To talk about one piece of golden intelligence that could be in this vignette a piece of ground truth over, which would be quite hard to get, over 100 pieces of really low level, not particularly sensitive information that could be much easier to obtain from an eavesdropping adversarial perspective, but when stitched together by intelligence analysts, and the biggest surprise for me in the time that I've been running Global Protect is the just amazing quality of people, and we heard from the previous panel talking about their approach to intelligence analysis. There's some fantastic analytical capability in the corporate space. So in terms of the ground truth from an adversarial perspective, very rarely are you ever going to get a golden nugget, so you're not really looking for it. What you're looking for is when people go outside later, please don't be wary when I come up and talk to you. What you're looking for is listening into those tiny nuggets of information. Who works for who, where they work. I had a conversation with a very, very senior minister in government a few years ago in their kitchen, and it was in the kitchen of their private house, so not their official residence. And I got sent because none of my team were prepared to tell that individual that they shouldn't have an Alexa thing in their kitchen. And I said to him, and his wife was there, and I said, look, Minister, you can't have that in your kitchen. And he said, this is my kitchen. What's going to happen in my kitchen? What state secret am I going to release in my kitchen? And I said to him, where you've been today, what you tell your wife you've done, all of it is useful information that might be small and not particularly important, but when stitched together, gives a picture that would probably be, when aggregated, much bigger than the one massive nugget they would have got if they were lucky by getting your office in Whitehall. So the search for ground truth from an attack perspective is that it's hard to get, and so what we go for is tiny bits of information that are really easy. Loose lips sink ships is the old analogy, the old phrase, and it's particularly pertinent when it comes to eavesdropping.
paints a stark yet relatable picture. Mike, I guess where does this then leave the promise of a lot of technology that when things don't all go wrong or aren't all down, sort of tell us they're the system of systems, and they do geofencing and they integrate loads of feeds. Where does this then leave that type of technology's promise? Because it works most of the time when things are not down, but then how do we then wean ourselves off it? Are we captured by such technology that we can't then revert to maps and A to Zs and things like that? Or is it easy to switch it on, switch it off?
I think moving away from the technology that we use every day. I mean, I use GPS in the car all the time, even routes I know really, because it will tell me if there's problems with traffic or accidents or things like that. I still know a lot of the routes. I can still read a map, I think. But it's that type of issue. One of the points I think that is important. So, for instance, some teams travel with a deployable security system to protect the principal, and they can be self-powered for a certain amount of time, either rechargeable, battery dependent. So have that, don't rely on equipment that needs to be mains powered. It will need mains resupply at some stage, but it should give you a buffer of some hours. That, I think, would be a sensible thing to do. I think it's not all doom and gloom. You know, the chances of actually going into an area, being hit by an earthquake and everything going down are exceedingly remote. But if you're going to one of those areas that is liable, then just start getting your head around that and what do we need to do. I think hurricanes, as we've seen in Florida, recently I was at the ACES GSX conference and flew out on the Wednesday evening. It was looking tighter for people flying out on the Thursday, and actually it moved away from Orlando anyway. But there's plenty of warning about those types of things. It's the sudden unseen, the tsunamis, the things like that, which can create horrendous things. And you can't always be fully prepared for that type of thing. But I think having a resilient mindset is important. And I think that's something we push to organisations all the time. You don't have to have a plan for everything, but you have to be able to plan to respond. And I think that's the thing that I would push across. It's that, what do I do here? How do I do that? Don't be dependent on your phone for taking notes. Have a notebook and a pen or pencil. Silly things like that, that I think it's just, have the basics covered and make the best use that you can of the technology that's out there while it's working.
And you paint an important picture about natural disasters. Of course, our thoughts are with our colleagues in Florida. I've got friends there myself, and it is a big deal. But then they had warning, so that's a plus. What about not natural disasters? What about an area, a country maybe, where the government or the local authorities or a militia are the ones creating the gap in comms? How do we navigate that? Now, I know that sometimes these can be difficult questions, but I'm going to think of, let's say, the Central African Republic. We had that on the previous panel. Let's use that. I think no one has any car interests, right? What if we go to an environment such as that, and it's not a natural disaster, it's the authorities which are causing this problem?
So when we're doing flights in and out of Africa, it's usually some sort of senior minister or high net worth business person. The business people tend to be very risk averse. They're constantly worried about. They don't trust the system. They don't trust a lot of people that are in that environment. So they're kind of dependent on us to get them safely from A to B and make sure that their privacy, we can't guarantee it, but we've been asked by some people, do you regularly sweep your aircraft? And I think, well, we're not flying the President of the United States. I mean, it's a good question in a way, but I mean, maybe there's a case for it. But yeah, I think the way we operate is all the emails encrypted, so you can't access that email unless you're a known user on the system. And comms, the crew have flight briefs, which is printed in our from our PCs in the office, and they take it with them. On the ground, it's very much need to know. We don't trust anyone. And the biggest threat to a VIP security is usually the ground handler, because they're not on a great salary. And they will, quite often, it happens in the Bourget, and I've had conversations with people in this room about it, they will tip off, the ground handlers will tip off the local criminals. And in Paris, at the Bourget airport, for example, there's one road that goes from the Bourget to downtown Paris, and it's just traffic light after traffic light. And these limos get surrounded by guys on mopeds and whatever else, smash windows, give me a watch, give me a whatever. And you think, hang on, that's not a coincidence. They weren't just waiting there, they knew that was coming. And I was one of the few people that actually shouted about it. And so I'm very much risk averse. When we're doing a flight, I don't relax until it's done, and I try, and I haven't had security training as such, but I try and think, right, what have we potentially missed here? And we need to go down to a granular level to make sure that every aspect around that principal's travel we've thought about and we've planned for. Because if something goes wrong and then they turn around and say, what did you do to plan for that? And we haven't got an answer, it makes us look negligent. So, there are corrupt governments in countries where we go to, and they are a threat because they have the power. So there are things we've done and things we do. We block tracking sometimes of aircraft. We change flight plans mid-flight. So we say, flight plan is 5, we're going to go to X, and actually we're going to Y. And that's perfectly legal, you're allowed to do that. I'd be well up for training to enhance our service more, so if anyone's up for having a chat about that, please talk to me.
Yeah, back to Mike.
Oh, sorry, I just put my hand.
Oh, okay.
Well, there we go. So on that subject of collaboration, what does this future skill set look like? And what use can a symposium such as this actually be? Could we all have a big tabletop exercise, Matt?
Yes. So I'm a learned businessman, right? I'm forever being told I run the company, but really group structure, I'm forever being told by the CEO to stop giving advice away for free. It literally happened 10 minutes ago before I came and sat down. In terms of what does the future look like, well, I'm sure everybody in the room has heard of the concept of converged security, right? So when you're at home and you wouldn't make the types of security mistakes in your, I'm not saying the people here make security mistakes, but professionals that make mistakes in security across all of the industry wouldn't make those mistakes at home, because we'd all be burgled all the time, we'd all be victim to home cyber attacks, we wouldn't give our next door neighbour our PIN code for our bank card. There's a litany of examples that you could use, and the way that you protect your home environment and your families, you guys would know this and girls would know this, but a lot of other people with security requirement wouldn't necessarily understand the idea of converged security, which is looking after your physical security presence, not only from a personal perspective with your principals, but also controlling the environment you're in, making sure it's physically safe and secure, making sure it's technically safe and secure. And that doesn't mean just having a technical capability. We spoke about pages earlier on in the recent attack, but it's also making sure, and I was in a government facility yesterday in London, that in their most sensitive room, the door to it had a Hikvision camera facing towards it. Still, so technical security isn't just about having a solution, it's having the right solution, right the way through to counter eavesdropping, which is, and I'm not trying to, this is the learned businessman, I'm not trying to do the TSCM arm of my company out of business, but actually defeating eavesdropping is really quite easy. Only have conversations in places that are secure, and that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have a TSCM assessment. In the most simple sense, it needs to have a lock on the door, make sure you know who owns the keys, and make sure that you're only letting people in that are vetted, continuously vetted. Because going back to the offensive side, many times have people been turned to go and do something because they've hit hard times. Life is hard, right? So I think what does it look like, in a really long answer, is understanding the principles of converged security, understand that they don't just apply to Harrods or to headquarters of Google, They apply to your personal lives and our houses where we all live, but your clients, your principals, large corporations, banks, the principles, the fundamentals are all the same. And so you can have, and it's a challenge, have within your teams a tabletop about security. If you write down all the considerations in kind of old military, Michael will understand, 3-column format that was thrown into us in military service, you're probably going to have the majority of headings that will cover the majority of threats that you have. You don't need expensive, I don't mean you guys, commercial companies don't need expensive security consultants very often unless they've got something really sensitive to protect, because security, certainly from an adversarial perspective, is largely common sense until you start moving into the counter-terrorism space, the fused all-source intelligence space that requires you to understand, as we were talking about with Phelim earlier, the ground truth, which is also hard to get. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question. I was on a rant.
Well, no, I mean it was quite open-ended of me, but I think that really shapes it. I'm conscious that every other panel before this one has opened it up to questions. So are there just any questions or comments or heckles from the audience?
I'd just like to raise one quick point. I think organisations do need expensive security consultants.
I think you're in a good company in this room. So if there are no other questions or comments,
sorry,
yes?
I keep butting in.
Oh, yeah.
I just like on the TSCM side. I agree with you. £400 a day is to come away thinking well. I think you can raise a level of awareness amongst operators about the threats that come from hostile threat actors with that sort of skill set. And there's a lot of ex-nation state trained threat actors out there who are for hire, and they have got some intensive skills. But an awareness of that vulnerability and how your principal may go, we all know, don't log on to the hotel Wi-Fi unless you're using VPN. But people do it, it's easy, it's natural. So try and stress that point of view. We've worked with clients who've got their own TSCM team, or they've brought them in, and they've said, yeah, the room was swept last night, or the room's being swept tonight. And then, your team will be on in the morning, and who's on from 2 o'clock till 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning? And people don't think about that. A room is clear from a good sweep by a good team the moment they leave. It's vulnerable, and I think that's the point that we will get across. And that type of awareness, it takes years to get to that level of expertise, but it takes a couple of hours to raise the awareness of how to engage with them and to understand what the threat is coming in. Sorry,
No, very good point. We have a question from Anna.
I'll make it quick since I know I'm standing between us and lunch. But the conversation around ground truth information, I think, is a really relevant one, and it's something that we use as well in our operations. But one thing I feel like isn't often addressed is how are you validating the sources that are getting you that ground truth information, right? We do a lot of that when we do traditional OSINT. How much trust do we place in this source? How are we evaluating it? Do you have any sort of best practices or thoughts on how you can, discern between true ground truth, right? Truth being the key word there, and rumors. I
can only tell you from. Thank you. I think this is broken. I can only answer from my company's perspective. One of the most successful things we've done over the last 18 months is launch a fusion hub. You've got this concept of GSOCs, right? And GSOCs are fantastic, really good sources of information. The way that most GSOCs work in the UK, and there are some fantastic examples of it working, is taking aggregated information from software that is scouring surface, deep and dark web for information. And for the most part, that information works and is suitable for the requirement it's fitting. The way that we've done it, and there are other examples, this isn't a sales pitch for Global Protect, there are other examples of other companies doing the same thing, and we found to great success, is we've put a fusion hub, so an all-source intelligence and analytical cell in the middle between the information we're getting from our data aggregators and it's kind of in 3-4 different intelligence buckets. So geopolitical, raw OSINT, financial asset tracking and geofencing. And we've put trained analysts, intelligence analysts in the middle of it to take that information from multiple sources, verify the sources, and then to analyse the information, not just in the context of is it right, is it good intelligence to hand to our clients, but also in the context of is it actually correct, is this the ground truth? And in instances where it isn't the ground truth, because we've got that human layer in the middle doing real quality analytical work, they're able to go back and verify if it's ground truth. The problem is, of course, ground truth, if it's at a strategic level, changes slowly, it changes a little bit faster operationally, and it changes really, really quickly tactically. And if it's okay, Phelim, to give a 20-second vignette, I had an argument with a very senior army officer many years ago in a country where we needed to get a picture that had been taken back to the UK. The picture was a tactical picture, and it was quite literally of, I'm trying to think of the right words without saying what it was, of a thing that was moving. And they wouldn't let us send it by text message on a personal phone. Things that would make all of us now shudder because it's such bad practice, but the information, the ground truth was changing so quickly, by the time it had been received, it was almost out of date. And so tactical level ground truth is, I would argue, and happy to debate it over lunch, is almost impossible to get unless your eyes on looking at it with a means of getting it back quickly. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, that's what we can debate at lunch. Do we have any more comments? No? Well, let's give Dr. Christopher, Matt and Mike a big round of applause.